The sun over southern Kansas was a merciless white coin, the kind that flattened the land and burned the edges of every shadow. By the time the stagecoach rattled to its halt, the dust had worked its way into every fold of Naomi Wells's dress, into her hair, her throat, and the pages of her worn prayer book. The driver barely glanced at her as he climbed down, checked the wheel bolts, and spat into the dirt. "End of the line, miss," he muttered. "Road's gone to bandits west of here. You'll have to wait on the next run." Then he flicked the reins. The horses lurched, and the stage clattered away, leaving her standing in the road, a single figure in a wash of yellow light and dust. Naomi adjusted the carpet bag in her hand. She was 25, but travel and fear had aged her bones. Her hair, plaited tight for the journey, was half loosened by the wind. The bonnet string whipped her cheek. All she could see were fields, pale as ash, and a few shacks crouched near a creek. The world was too big, too empty, and she felt like a single mistake in it. Somewhere behind her, boots scuffed the gravel. She turned. A man stood where the dirt road bent toward a split rail fence, tall, broad across the shoulders, a shotgun tucked under one arm. He wore no badge, but something about the way he carried himself told her he'd worn one once. His face was half in shadow under the brim of his hat. When he spoke, his voice was low, rasped with disuse. "You lost, ma'am." His manner wasn't unkind, but it wasn't soft either. She swallowed the dryness in her throat. "The coach was robbed an hour east of here. They left us by the river crossing. I caught a ride this far. I was told there was a post road through to Wichita." He looked at the empty horizon and then back at her, as if measuring both. "There is, but it's 3 days on foot, and no water worth the name between." Silence stretched. Wind worried the hem of her skirt. She stood straighter, trying not to seem afraid. "Then I'll rest here till another coach comes." He shifted the shotgun to his other hand, nodded toward the far ridge. "There's my place, Mirren Ranch. You'll get a roof and supper if you want it. I don't run a boarding house, but you can work some for it." Something in her chest unclenched just enough to let her breathe again. "Naomi Wells," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Luke Mirren." They walked without another word, dust curling around their boots. At the edge of his land, the fences began, long, weathered lines that cut the horizon into fields. A windmill creaked somewhere, slow and tired. Cows turned their heads to watch. When the ranch house finally came into view, she stopped short. It was sturdy and neat, 2 stories of whitewashed boards, its roof glinting with tin patches. The porch boards were swept clean, the windows curtained. Not rich, but not the ruin she had feared. Luke went ahead to the well and pumped water into a tin pail. "You'll want a drink," he said. She knelt down, cupped her hands, the cold water shocking her dry mouth. When she glanced up, he was watching, not in the way the men in town had looked, but as if he was memorizing a detail for later. Inside the house smelled of coffee grounds, tobacco, and sawdust. There was a chair by the fire, a Bible on the mantel, and not much else that spoke of company. He pointed upstairs. "Spare room's the first door. Wash basin by the window. You can rest a spell." Naomi nodded. She was used to silence, but this was a strange kind. Heavy, not hostile. The silence of a man who'd chosen it. As she climbed the stairs, she could feel his eyes follow her only halfway, then stop, as if he didn't allow himself to look too long. The days that followed moved with the rhythm of wind and hoofbeats. Naomi rose before dawn to the smell of coffee and the scrape of Luke's boots across the porch. She listened to him in the mornings before showing herself. The solid thud of wood on wood, the low murmur as he spoke to his horse. A man who spoke more easily to animals than people, she thought. She began taking on tasks without being asked, sweeping, tending the fire, mending the curtain hem that flapped in the draft. He didn't stop her. He didn't thank her either. He just kept moving through the house like a shadow that had learned to carry its own weight. At night, when the lamps were turned low, she heard him outside. The rhythmic creak of the porch boards as he paced, the rasp of a match striking for his pipe. The first time she saw the faint glow of tobacco through the window, she was startled by how human it seemed, a single warm spark in all that darkness. The house itself began to breathe with her presence. A bowl of apples appeared on the table. A scrap of cloth hung to dry by the stove. The air smelled faintly of lavender soap. Luke noticed, though he said nothing. Men like him didn't remark on small graces. They simply absorbed them until they became necessary. He was gone most days, working on the fence lines or checking the stock. She learned the sound of his return, the clop of the horse, the groan of the gate, and the long pause before his boots touched the porch. Every evening it was the same pause, like a man deciding whether to go inside or keep his distance. One afternoon, the sky turned the sullen color that comes before a storm. Naomi was in the yard, gathering laundry when the first drops fell. She turned to hurry inside but froze. Luke was there, hat pulled low, watching the sky. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled to the elbow, and the wet fabric clung to the shape of his arms. "Storm will pass quick," he said, barely raising his voice. She nodded and kept working. The wind caught her skirt, plastering it against her legs. Lightning flickered. He moved forward and took the basket from her hands before she could protest. Their fingers brushed, rough callus against smooth palm, and the air around them tightened. He carried the basket inside without another word, but the silence after him felt altered, charged. Later, while he ate the stew she'd made, he spoke for the first time in more than a sentence. "Used to be a hired gun," he said. "Figured I'd had enough of blood and noise. This place was quiet." She kept her eyes on the bowl. Quiet can be a heavy thing. He looked at her then, really looked. "You know about heavy things?" Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she set the spoon down, rose, and cleared the stove. The lamplight caught the fine line of her jaw. "I know enough," she said softly. After she'd gone upstairs, Luke sat for a long time with his elbows on the table, staring at the empty chair across from him. The storm passed, but the house still felt full of thunder. In her room, Naomi unfolded the small scrap of paper she'd carried since Ohio. The half-burned notice offering $50 for her return. The edges were charred, the ink half blurred, but her name was still there. She held it over the lamp flame until it curled to ash. Outside, the porch boards creaked once more as Luke walked his nightly circle, steady, protective, unaware that the danger he would soon face had already learned her name. Morning light bled soft and gold over the prairie, turning every drop of dew into glass. Naomi stood at the pump, sleeves rolled, hair wrapped in a scarf. The air was cool enough to see her breath. She had begun to move like she belonged, quiet steps that matched the rhythm of the ranch. Luke was already outside, mending the corral fence. The sound of the hammer carried through the stillness, steady as a heartbeat. He had taken off his coat. The thin linen of his shirt clung to the muscles in his back. When he straightened, the sun cut along the edge of his jaw, showing the pale scar that ran from ear to collar. She wondered who or what had left it there. "Need a hand?" she asked, setting down the bucket. He glanced over his shoulder, expression unreadable. "You know tools?" "I know I've got 2 good ones right here." She raised her palms. Something in him softened, though his mouth didn't show it. He handed her a length of wire and a pair of pliers. The work was simple but rough. Hold, twist, pull. The smell of raw pine mixed with dust and sweat. When their hands brushed, passing a nail, her breath caught. His knuckles dwarfed hers, but he was careful in a way that made her pulse race. She noticed the tremor in his hand when he paused to stretch his shoulder. "Old wound?" "Bullet," he said. "Long time ago." She wanted to ask more. Who fired it? Who he'd been then? But his face closed like a door. They worked in silence until noon. When he finally spoke, it was half to himself. "You keep at things. Most folk give up when the sun hits like this." "Gave up once," she said. "Didn't like who I became after." He looked at her then, full on, and whatever he saw quieted him. Later, when the fence was done, they stood side by side, dust-coated, sharing a canteen. The water ran down her chin. He reached without thinking, thumb brushing the drop away. The moment stretched. His hand still lifted, her eyes locked on his. Then he stepped back, muttering, "Best seed to the stalk." That evening, she left a plate on the porch for him. Bread, beans, coffee. He ate there in silence, while she hummed inside at the stove. He couldn't see her face, only her shadow moving across the curtain. But it steadied him in a way whiskey never had. Before bed she opened the window, listening for his footsteps. When they came, slow, measured, she exhaled. The night wind carried the scent of horses and wood smoke, and something else new. The warmth of wanting, still unnamed, but already alive. By the second week, Naomi's name had made its quiet way into town. Not through gossip at first, just the sort of murmurs that gather when a new woman is seen buying coffee beans and lamp oil, when her presence changes the shape of a man's routine. Luke rode into Dodge Crossing every Saturday. He used to keep to himself, get his supplies, and ride back by sundown. But lately he lingered. Always one stop, at the dry goods store. Always the same calm, "Need anything else?" asked the woman behind the counter. This week, Naomi had come along. It was her first time leaving the ranch since arriving, and she wore her plainest dress, hair tied back, eyes steady. Still, every man in town stopped long enough to watch. A few tipped hats, a few whispered too loud. At the far end of the boardwalk, the piano from the saloon spilled a raucous tune into the street. Out on the balcony leaned Sadie Harlan, tall, pale, gold curls catching the sunlight, the kind of beauty men paid good money to listen to sing. She saw Luke first. The look she gave him was half invitation, half reproach. "Well, if it ain't Luke Merrin himself," she drawled, voice honeyed and sharp. "Didn't think you still knew what daylight looked like." Luke nodded once. "Afternoon, Sadie." Her eyes flicked to Naomi, cool and measuring. "You've been hiding a lady out there at that lonely ranch. You never struck me as the charitable kind." Naomi's hand tightened around the strap of her bag, but she said nothing. Luke's jaw flexed once. "She's a worker," he said flatly, "and under my roof. That's all." Sadie's smile thinned. "Ain't that just noble? Guess we all find new ways to keep busy." The air between them turned sharp as glass. Naomi could feel it, feel the woman's scorn prick like a burr under the skin. She wanted to walk away, but pride rooted her feet. "Mr. Merrin," she said softly, without looking at him, "if we're done here, I'd like to be home before dark." He tipped his hat to Sadie in cold farewell and steered Naomi toward the wagon. The murmurs followed them down the street, a snake of whispers winding through dust. That night, Naomi worked later than usual, scrubbing the table though it was already clean. Luke lingered in the doorway, the lamplight cutting hard lines across his face. "She was trying to get a rise," he said finally. "You didn't give her one." Naomi didn't look up. "Takes more than that to move me." He stepped closer until his shadow crossed her hands. "Most women wouldn't have stood their ground." "I ain't most women." That earned the smallest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'm learning that." She turned then, and for a breath the space between them charged and changed. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and hers lifted to meet it. Not fear, not boldness. Something between the two. The tension broke when the wind slammed a shutter outside, snapping them both back to themselves. Luke muttered something about checking the stables and left before the silence could speak for him. Naomi watched him go, pulse quick and confused, wishing she didn't miss his presence the moment he was gone. 2 nights later, the dogs barked long after midnight. Luke was on his feet before the echo died. He opened the door to find 2 riders in the yard, dusty, armed, faces hard from miles. "Evening, Mr. Merrin," one called. "We're hunting a runaway woman, name of Naomi Wells. Belonged to Hargreaves' estate out in Virginia. Got papers here, says she's wanted for theft and flight." Naomi, barefoot on the stairs, froze at the sound of her name. Luke's hand slid to the shotgun by the door. His voice came low and cold. "Only thieves I see here are the kind that come hunting women at night. You got 1 minute to turn those horses around." The taller rider laughed, mean and careless. "Don't matter how far she's run, the law's on our side, or you're figuring to stand in it." Luke stepped out into the yard, cocked the shotgun once. The sound cracked through the dark. "On my land, the law's mine." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the bounty hunters backed their horses, muttering curses. "We'll be back," one spat, "with papers, with men." When the dust settled, Naomi stood in the doorway, trembling, one hand pressed to her heart. Luke looked up at her, jaw set. "You could have told me," he said. Her voice was small, ragged. "Would you have believed me?" His silence was an answer. but not the kind she feared. It was heavy with something else, the sound of a man deciding which side of a line he'll die on. The night bled into a thin gray dawn. Luke hadn't slept. He sat on the porch with the shotgun across his knees, waiting for the first sound of hoofs. Naomi came to the doorway at sunrise, a shawl around her shoulders. She looked smaller in the cold light, but her eyes were steady. "They'll come back," she said quietly. He nodded. "I'm counting on it." She stepped closer, voice low. "If they take me, you can say you didn't know. Tell them I slipped away in the night." He turned toward her, slow, deliberate. "Don't insult me like that." The wind lifted the ends of her shawl. Somewhere, a rooster crowed, thin and lonely. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Quieter, deeper. "Every man gets one thing he'll stand for, no matter the cost. Guess you're mine." Something inside her broke and mended at the same time. She wanted to speak, but the sound died in her throat. By mid-morning, the riders came back. 3 this time. The tall one from before rode in front, his hat low, the other 2 flanking him with rifles at their sides. Luke was already in the yard. The shotgun rested easy in his hands. The leader smirked. "Morning, Marin. We got papers now. Signed by a judge in St. Louis. You hand her over. We'll be gone before dinner." Luke's jaw flexed once. "Ain't my habit to hand over guests to scavengers." "Guest?" The man laughed. "She's stolen property." Luke stepped in closer. Eyes gone to ice. Property died with the war. The bounty man sneered, spitting in the dirt. "Fine words. Shame you'll bleed for 'em." He reached for his gun. Too slow. Luke fired once. The blast echoed off the hills, scattering the horses. One of the men went down, screaming. The others pulled back fast, dust flying. "Tell your master," Luke called, voice carrying over the wind. "If he wants her, he can come stake his honor himself." They fled, leaving silence thick enough to choke on. Naomi came running from the porch, breathless. "You could have been killed." He wiped the sweat from his brow. "Ain't the first time somebody tried." Her hands trembled. "You shouldn't have done it for me." He looked at her then, really looked, and something raw cracked open between them. "I didn't do it for you," he said slowly. "Did it because I couldn't watch it happen again." "Again?" He hesitated. "Years back, in Texas, they came for a woman. Same as you. I let her go without lifting a hand. Told myself it wasn't my fight. I see her face every night I try to sleep." Naomi's voice hitched. The weight of his confession hung heavy, but it was also a bridge. She reached up, fingertips brushing the scar at his jaw. "You carry ghosts." "So do you." The air between them tightened until there was no room left for fear. When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle. It was years of silence breaking. She tasted gunpowder and rain, and the ache of every word they hadn't said. When they finally broke apart, she leaned her forehead to his chest, listening to his heart hammer. "What now?" she whispered. "Now we wait, and hope hell takes its time finding us." By the next afternoon, the whole town had heard. The bounty men had leaped through Dodge Crossing, bloodied and raging, spreading talk about the negress thief hiding under Luke Mirren's roof. Rumors grew the way prairie fires do, fast, bright, hungry for more. By sundown, the saloon was full. Sadie Harlan leaned on the piano, her voice dripping with sweet venom. I always said a man like Luke could stay clean forever. Guess we now know what kind of company he keeps now. The crowd murmured. Some smirked, some nodded. A few men laughed too loud, drunk on talk they didn't have the courage to test. The laughter stopped when the door swung open. Luke stepped in, coat dusty, shirt open at the throat, eyes as cold as winter. The murmur died the way a candle dies when someone pinches the flame. He walked straight through the crowd and stopped in front of Sadie. Next man or woman who speaks her name in here, he said, voice low, best be ready to finish it with me. She blinked, smile faltering. Luke, I didn't mean... Meaning don't fix damage. His gaze swept the room. You all got memories as short as your whiskey glasses. That woman saved a man's life when the coach got robbed, nursed the wounded when the rest of you hid. You want a name to curse? Try mine. He turned and left before anyone dared to breathe. Outside, the air was thick with twilight and cicadas. Naomi stood near the hitching post, her shawl pulled tight. She had heard enough to know what he'd done. You shouldn't have gone, she said softly. Shouldn't have let 'em think I'd hide you. Her eyes shimmered, the first tears she'd let fall since the night of the robbery. I don't know how to thank you. He gave a small smile, a crooked smile. You just did. They walked back together through the fields, the silence between them no longer sharp, but full, like soil after rain. That night the ranch was quiet. Luke sat at the table cleaning his gun, his motions slow, thoughtful. Naomi moved around him, folding cloth, banking the fire, humming low. When she passed, he caught her wrist, fingers rough against the soft of her skin. You got a place here if you want it. She looked at him for a long moment. As what? He held her gaze. As mine, if that's what you want. Her heart beat hard enough to shake her voice. You sure? Never been sure of much, but I know peace when I see it, and I see it in you. She knelt beside him, taking his hand. Then I'll stay. Outside, the prairie wind howled once and quieted, as if even the land knew the fight was over. Snow melted in slow silver streams along the ridge. The ranch had changed. A new fence, a coat of whitewash, a woman's laughter carried on the wind. Luke was chopping wood by the barn when Naomi called from the porch. You'll wake the babies! He grinned without looking up. They're your children too. You hush 'em. She came down barefoot, holding two swaddled bundles. One whimpered, the other slept. I reckon they take after their father, stubborn as tree roots. He set the axe down and took one of the babies from her arms. Good. The world needs more stubborn. When he bent to kiss her, she caught his collar, pulling him close, slow and sure. The wind rose again, warm now, brushing over fields ready to blow.